Hello and welcome to our channel. Today we are venturing into the heart of a mystery. Not a mystery of forgotten treasure or a lost city, but a mystery of flesh and blood, of teeth and claws and human terror. We are not visiting a king's court or a general's battlefield, though both kings and generals will play their part in our story. Instead, we are traveling back in time to a place on the map where history bleeds into folklore, where meticulously documented fact becomes the blueprint for a waking nightmare. Our destination is the former province of Gévaudan, a remote and rugged region nestled in the mountains of southern France. And our subject is not a person but a monster. A monster that was, for 3 terrifying years, undeniably horrifically real. Let us begin by painting a picture of the world in which our story takes place, for no monster can be understood outside of the context that created it. The year is 1764. On the surface, this is the grand age of enlightenment, the siècle de Lumières. In the glittering, candlelit salons of Paris, hundreds of miles and a world away to the north, the intellectual landscape of Europe is being fundamentally redrawn. Philosophers and thinkers like Voltaire, Diderot, and Rousseau are championing the supreme power of human reason. They are waging a war against ignorance, intolerance, and superstition. With tools like Diderot's groundbreaking encyclopedia, they seek to catalog, understand, and explain the entirety of human knowledge. The universe, they argue, is not some chaotic, spirit-haunted mystery, but a great and intricate clockwork mechanism, perhaps created by a divine watchmaker, but governed by rational, understandable, and predictable physical laws. The scientific method is the new gospel. Logic is the new God. Humanity, it was believed by the intellectual and social elite, was finally, decisively stepping out of the long, dark, fearful shadow of the medieval past and into the bright, clear, uncompromising light of modernity. But in Gévaudan, that light had not yet arrived. It would be more accurate to say that the very landscape itself seemed to repel it, to hold fast to an older, darker, and more primal reality. Gévaudan was and still is a land that feels ancient, a world apart. Part of the vast granitic plateau of the Massif Central, it is a region of breathtaking but brutal beauty. High, windswept plains, known as causes, are covered in a sea of heather and broom, and broken by strange, weathered granite formations that look like the bones of the earth breaking through the skin. These plains fall away abruptly into deep, shadowy gorges carved by swift-flowing rivers like the Allier and the Truyère. And everywhere there are forests, not the manicured woodlands of a royal park, but dark, dense, primeval forests of pine, beech and oak, so thick that in their depths the summer sun barely touches the moss-covered floor. The soil is poor and acidic. The weather is extreme, a character in its own right. The winters are long and savage, capable of burying the scattered hamlets and isolated farmsteads under immense drifts of snow, cutting them off from the rest of the world for months at a time, creating a palpable sense of isolation and vulnerability. The people who inhabited this land were a product of their environment. They were not the sophisticated, cynical citizens of Paris. They were a people of the soil. Peasant farmers, tenant sharecroppers, and shepherds, their lives an unceasing cycle of back-breaking labor. They were hardy, stubborn, self-reliant, and deeply, unshakably devout. Their lives were governed not by the philosopher's treatise, but by the turning of the seasons, the success of the meager rye harvest, and the tolling of the parish church bell. While the Parisian philosophes debated the theoretical nature of man and government in their elegant drawing rooms, the people of Gévaudan were preoccupied with more immediate and tangible concerns: the threat of a failed harvest, the specter of starvation, the chill of a winter that could kill their livestock, and the ever-present danger of wolves. And they lived in a profoundly different mental universe. For them, the world was not a clockwork machine. It was an enchanted and often malevolent place, a theater for the eternal, ongoing war between God and the devil. The wind whistling through the pines at night was not merely moving air. It could be the whisper of a lost soul. A sudden illness was not just a biological event. It could be a sign of a curse, the work of an envious neighbor. The will-o'-the-wisp, the feu follet, flickering over a marsh was not swamp gas. It was a demon luring travelers to their doom. The forest was not just a collection of trees and animals. It was the liminal space, the domain of ancient spirits, of demons, and of those who consorted with them. In this worldview, the wolf was far more than a simple predator. It was a creature freighted with 1,000 years of accumulated mythological dread. It was the living symbol of ravenous, untamable nature. In Christian iconography, it was the embodiment of the devil himself, preying on the flock of Christ, the Good Shepherd. In the folklore that was as real to them as the Catechism, the wolf was the companion of witches, the steed of Satan, and sometimes it was something far worse. It was the Lugaruth werewolf, a man cursed by God or in league with the devil, who was condemned to shed his human form and take on the shape of a ravenous beast, driven by an insatiable hunger for human flesh. For the people of Gévaudan in 1764, the werewolf was not a fairy tale for frightening children. It was a potential terrifying theological reality. The famous fairy tale of Little Red Riding Hood, in its original pre-grim French version as recorded by Charles Perrault, was not a charming story. It was a brutal cautionary tale ending with the wolf devouring the little girl. This was the world they knew. It is into this world, this crucible of hardship, faith and fear, that our story begins. It begins not with a roar in the night, but with a young woman's scream in the bright light of day. In the early summer of 1764, a young woman of Acher, or cattle herder, was tending her herd in the Forêt de Mercoeur, near the town of Langon. She was alone, far from the nearest village, in that liminal space between civilization and wilderness. Suddenly a huge wolf-like creature burst from the trees and charged her. It was larger than any wolf she had ever seen, its fur a strange reddish-gray. It moved with unnatural speed and aggression. But her herd of cattle, sensing the unnatural intent of the predator, did not scatter in panic as they would have from a normal wolf. The bulls, powerful and protective, lowered their horns and charged the creature, forming a defensive ring of muscle and horn around the terrified woman. The beast, snarling and snapping, was driven back and, after a moment of frustrated rage, retreated into the forest. The woman survived, deeply shaken but physically unharmed. She told her story in the village, a story of a beast of unusual size and ferocity, repelled only by her herd's courage. It was noted but largely dismissed. A frightening encounter with the bold wolf perhaps, but such things happened. Life in Gévaudan went on. The official story, the one that would be chronicled in parish records and military reports, the one that would be written in blood, begins a few weeks later, on the 30th of June 1764. The first officially recognized victim was a 14-year-old girl named Jean Boulette. She lived in the tiny, isolated village of Hubax, near Langon. That day, like so many other days in her short life, she had taken her small flock of sheep to graze in the fields bordering the forest. She was alone. We cannot know the exact sequence of events that unfolded in that lonely pasture. We can only imagine her terror, the sudden awareness of being watched, the rustle in the undergrowth, the sight of the creature emerging from the tree-line, its eyes fixed on her. We only know the outcome. She did not return home that evening. As dusk began to settle over the hills, casting long dark shadows from the trees, and she failed to appear, her family grew anxious. A search party was formed. Her father, her neighbors, armed with lanterns and pitchforks, went out into the growing darkness, their calls of "Jean! Jean!" echoing unanswered through the silent woods. They found her later. Or rather, they found what the creature had left of her. The report is stark, stripped of emotion but horrifying in its clinical detail. She had been viciously killed, her throat torn out, her chest ripped open. Her body had been partially devoured. The local authorities, such as they were, concluded it was the work of a wolf. A tragic but, in this harsh land, not an entirely unfamiliar story. A funeral was held. The village priest commended Jean Balette's soul to God and warned his flock of the dangers of the forest. A warning was issued to the other shepherds in the area to be extra vigilant. But then it happened again. And again. And with each new death, the horror deepened, and the terrible unique signature of the predator became sickeningly clear. In August, another young girl was killed while tending her family's cows. In early September, a young boy from the village of Estritz attacked and killed. Later that same month, a 36-year-old woman from the hamlet of Aulac, slain in a field. A pattern began to emerge, and it was chillingly specific. The victims were almost always women or children, and they were almost always alone, tending livestock in the remote pastures and meadows that bordered the forests. And the nature of the attacks was horrifyingly consistent, and horrifically unwolf-like. A typical wolf when attacking prey will hamstring it, attacking the powerful muscles of the legs to bring the animal down before going for the throat. This creature did not do that. It went straight for the head and the throat, often decapitating its victims with a single impossibly powerful bite or a savage twist of its neck. It seemed to kill not just for sustenance, but with a terrifying selective malice. It would often ignore the sheep and cattle grazing nearby, animals that would have been an easier and more substantial meal, focusing its entire fury on its human victim. The survivors, and there were a few, those lucky enough to be in a group, or close enough to the safety of a village to be rescued, told stories that pushed the attacks from the realm of the ordinary into the realm of the monstrous. Their descriptions, collected by priests and officials, painted a picture of a creature that seemed to defy zoological classification. This was no common wolf. They described an animal of enormous size. Many saying it was as large as a calf or a young cow. Its chest was broad and powerful, its hindquarters slender and agile, like a greyhound's. Its fur was a strange, thick, reddish-gray, with some reports mentioning a distinctive dark stripe running down its spine. Its head was massive, out of proportion to its body, with a flattened, almost pig-like snout and a wide, gaping mouth filled with huge, prominent teeth. Its tail was long and powerful, and some witnesses insisted it was tufted at the end, like a lion's. Its paws were huge, armed with formidable claws that left deep gouges in the earth. Its behavior was just as strange. It moved with terrifying speed, capable of incredible leaps that could clear a man on horseback. When struck with bullets from the peasants' crude, black powder muskets, or jabbed with iron-tipped pikes, it seemed to shrug off the blows as if they were mere annoyances, sometimes not even breaking its stride. And most chillingly, it did not sound like a wolf. The howl of a wolf is a lonely, mournful, iconic sound. This creature's cry was described as a horrifying, high-pitched scream, a grunting roar, or a strange, wheezing cough, a sound that curdled the blood and echoed through the valleys at dusk. By the late autumn of 1764, the entire region was in the grip of a full-blown, palpable panic. This was no longer a series of isolated tragedies. It was a siege by a supernatural-seeming entity. No one felt safe. Men began going to the fields in armed groups, carrying pitchforks, scythes, and their ancient, unreliable muskets. Children were forbidden from leaving their homes, kept indoors as virtual prisoners. The very economy of the region, which depended on livestock being able to graze freely in the common lands, was grinding to a halt. The people of Gévaudan, in their terror, gave their tormentor a name. They called it simply La Bête, the beast. This is the true story of the beast of Gévaudan. It is not a fairy tale or a dim legend. It is a meticulously documented historical event, a 3-year reign of terror that would leave over 100 people dead, and would eventually involve the highest echelons of the French state. It is a story that would see the King of France dispatch his finest hunters and thousands of soldiers to this remote province. It is a chapter of French history that reads like a modern-day true crime story, blended with the supernatural horror film. Tonight, we will open the official case file on one of the most terrifying and mysterious historical monsters ever recorded. We will track the beast through the blood-soaked hills of Gévaudan. We will examine the evidence, we will meet the hunters, the heroes, and the victims, and we will try, after 250 years, to answer the question that has haunted historians, scientists, and monster hunters ever since. What exactly was the Beast of Gévaudan? Part 1. The Reign of Terror and the Military Response. As the last leaves of autumn fell from the trees and the first snows of winter began to dust the high peaks of the Margeride Mountains, the terror in Gévaudan did not subside. It intensified. The beast, whatever it was, seemed to grow bolder, more audacious, and more contemptuous of human presence. It was as if it understood the fear it was creating and reveled in it, a demonic intelligence directing its bloody work. Let us try to inhabit the psychological landscape of a Gévaudan peasant in the winter of 1764. Your world, once stretching to the horizon of the fields you worked, has now shrunk to the size of your small stone house and its immediate yard. The forest that surrounds you, once a source of firewood, game, and forage, has transformed into a malevolent entity, the lair of a demon. Every trip to the well for water, every journey to the village church for Mass, is fraught with peril. You move in groups, your eyes constantly scanning the treeline. You huddle around your meager fire at night, listening to the wind howl outside, and every gust sounds like a scream. A branch scraping against the roof sounds like claws on stone. The community, once a source of comfort and strength, is now a collection of shared, whispered terror. Rumors fly, each more fantastic than the last. One neighbor claims to have seen the beast with flames pouring from its mouth. Another swears it walked on two legs for a moment before dropping to all fours. The parish priest, a man as frightened as his flock, stands at the pulpit, his face grim and pale. He speaks of the beast as a divine scourge, a punishment sent by God for the sins of the people. He points to the fashionable frivolities of the age, the books of the philosophers, the waning of true faith as the cause of God's wrath. He calls for prayer, for fasting, for public acts of repentance. And the people obey. They pray until their knees are raw. They make pilgrimages to local shrines. But the prayers do not stop the killing. God remains silent. The local gentry and officials, men like the Etienne Lafont, the syndic of the diocese, and the Bishop of Mende, Monseigneur de Choiseul-Beaupré, were overwhelmed. They were men of a feudal world, not equipped to handle a crisis of this magnitude. They organized local hunts, but these were little more than disorganized mobs of frightened peasants, poorly armed with agricultural tools and a few ancient muskets. They were completely ineffective. Finally, in desperation, Lafont and the bishop penned a formal request for military assistance. Their plea, written in the formal deferential language of the Ancien Regime, made its way up the chain of command to the military governor of the Languedoc region, the Comte de Montcalm. The Comte de Montcalm, a man of the Enlightenment sitting in his comfortable offices in the sophisticated city of Montpellier, likely read the report with a degree of skepticism. A man-eating wolf causing trouble in the highlands? Unfortunate, certainly, but hardly a matter for the royal army. Yet, the report was insistent, the death toll was rising, and the situation was causing significant civil unrest and disrupting tax collection. Reluctantly, he dispatched a company of 56 dragoons mounted infantry to the region. They were under the command of a Captain Jean-Baptiste Duhamel. Captain Duhamel was a career soldier, a professional. He and his men were veterans of the 7 Years' War. They had faced the armies of Prussia and Great Britain. He arrived in the town of Mende in October 1764, full of the confidence and quiet arrogance of a man who believed he was being sent to solve a trivial, if messy, problem. He saw the local peasants as ignorant, superstitious simpletons who had allowed a common wolf to get the better of them. He was a representative of the rational, orderly, powerful French state. He and his uniformed, disciplined dragoons would restore order quickly and efficiently. He was about to receive a harsh and humiliating lesson in the nature of this particular enemy. Duhamel's strategy was one of overwhelming force, the only kind he knew. He organized a series of massive hunts, the battues. These were colossal undertakings, bringing the entire region to a standstill. He would conscript thousands of local peasants, sometimes as many as 20 or 30,000, from all the surrounding parishes. This huge, reluctant army of men, women, and older children would be arranged in a vast sweeping line, sometimes miles long, stretching from one valley to the next. On Duhamel's command, they would advance through a section of forest, beating drums, blowing horns, shouting, and firing their muskets into the air, creating a terrifying cacophony. The idea was to flush any and all wildlife, deer, boar, wolves, and hopefully the beast out of the forest and into the open, where Duhamel and his dragoons, positioned strategically at the edge of the woods, could get a clear shot. Time and time again, these immense and disruptive operations ended in abject failure. The beast proved to be a phantom. It seemed to possess a preternatural ability to sense the approaching danger and slip through the human net. The hunts would sweep through a forest, finding nothing but a few terrified deer, only for the beast to strike again a day later, 10 miles away, in a completely different direction. It was as if it were toying with them, demonstrating the futility of their efforts. The soldiers, used to the open terrain of European battlefields, found the dense forests, steep gorges, and treacherous bogs of Gévaudan to be an impossible environment. Their horses were of little use. They were bogged down, clumsy, and conspicuous. The landscape itself had become the beast's greatest ally. The attacks continued unabated throughout the brutal winter of 1764 to 1765. The beast seemed entirely untroubled by the bitter cold and deep snow. Its tracks were often seen, huge and unsettling in the fresh powder, but it was rarely glimpsed. It moved like a ghost through the frozen landscape. In December, it killed 2 young girls in a single terrible day. On Christmas Eve, it claimed a 12-year-old boy named Jean Verrier. The parish priests continued their grim work, recording each death in their registers, their careful script a testament to the ongoing slaughter. Marie-Jean Vallée, aged 20. Therese Korschel, aged 7. Jean Gybergs, aged 26. The litany of the dead was a litany of the young, the female, and the vulnerable. Amidst this relentless catalogue of terror, however, a story of extraordinary courage emerged, an incident that would become one of the most famous and enduring chapters in the entire saga of the beast. The date was January 12, 1765. The place was a snow-covered field near the village of Villaret-d'Apcher. A group of 7 children, 5 boys and 2 girls, were out in the field, trying to keep their cattle from straying. They ranged in age from 8 to 12. The eldest, the de facto leader of the small group, was a 12-year-old boy named Jacques Portefaix. Suddenly, the beast appeared from a thicket at the edge of the field and charged them. It moved with silent, terrifying speed across the snow. It ignored the cattle and went straight for the children, its intelligence once again shockingly apparent. It seized one of the youngest boys, 8-year-old Joseph Panifieu, by the collar of his coat and began to drag him away towards the woods. In that moment of supreme terror, the other children had a choice: to scatter and run for their own lives, or to stand and fight. They chose to fight. Jacques Portefaix, showing a courage and leadership far beyond his years, rallied the others. Their only weapons were the crude, homemade pikes they used as cattle goads, long wooden sticks with a sharpened iron point fixed to the end. Forming a small, desperate phalanx, a miniature version of an ancient Greek fighting formation, they charged the monster. They jabbed at its flanks, its legs, its head. They screamed and shouted, fighting with the furious courage of cornered lions. The beast, clearly surprised and angered by this coordinated and unexpectedly fierce assault from its intended prey, dropped the boy and turned on the group, its lips curled back in a snarl. For several agonizing minutes, this small band of children held off the monster, jabbing and retreating, protecting each other from its snapping jaws and swiping claws. Finally, the beast, perhaps unwilling to sustain further injury for a meal it now had to work for, let out a frustrated roar and retreated back into the woods, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. They had done it. They had faced the devil and won. They had saved their friend. Joseph Panifieu was badly wounded, his cheek torn open, but he was alive. The story of their incredible bravery spread like wildfire. It was a single defiant spark of light in a growing darkness. The tale was retold in every village, in every church. It soon reached the newspapers in Paris, and from there, the gilded halls of the Palace of Versailles. The king himself, Louis XV, was so moved by the account of their courage that he awarded Jacques Portefaix a royal pension of 300 livres a year and decreed that he was to be educated at the state's expense. The other children also received smaller rewards. The heroism of the children of Violette became a national sensation. But the story, celebrated as it was, also served to highlight the utter and humiliating failure of the official response. If a group of children armed with sticks could drive the beast away, why couldn't a company of trained soldiers with muskets and swords kill it? The pressure on the government intensified. The affair of the beast of Gévaudan was no longer a remote, provincial problem. It had become a national embarrassment, a stain on the honor of the king and his army. The burgeoning French press, particularly a popular journal called the Courrier d'Avignon, seized upon the story with glee. They published lurid, highly sensationalized accounts of the beast's attacks, complete with terrifying and imaginative woodcut illustrations. These images, which were often copied and reprinted, depicted a monstrous semi-mythical creature part wolf, part hyena, part dragon, with the mane like a lion and a ridged back. They solidified the image of the beast in the public imagination and turned the tragedy into a media phenomenon. The story went viral 18th century style. It was discussed in the coffee houses of London, the courts of Vienna, and the salons of St. Petersburg. The world was watching. The king had to act and act decisively. Part 2. The King's Hunters and the First Beast. The international humiliation was more than King Louis XV and his court could bear. In the rigid hierarchy of 18th century Europe, the image of the monarch was a carefully curated projection of divine right, absolute power, and unshakable authority. The inability to protect his own subjects from a wild animal, no matter how ferocious, was a profound sign of weakness. The English press, France's perennial rival, was reveling in the affair, publishing satirical cartoons and articles that portrayed the mighty French kingdom as a backwards, superstitious nation being terrorized by a single wolf. The affair was damaging the prestige of the French crown. In February 1765, the king made his move. Captain Duhamel and his hapless dragoons were recalled in disgrace. Their conventional military approach had been a dismal and expensive failure. The king decided it was time to move past the army and send in the specialists. He summoned two men, a father and son named Jean and Jean-Charles Deneval, sometimes spelled Deneval. They were professional wolf hunters, louvetiers from Normandy, and they possessed a fearsome, almost legendary reputation. They were celebrities in their highly specialized field, credited with having killed over 1,200 wolves in their careers. They were, in short, the best there was. They arrived in Gévaudan with a pack of 8 of their best-trained wolfhounds, brimming with the confidence of experts who believed they were about to show the ignorant locals and the clumsy soldiers how a real hunt was conducted. The Denevals immediately and publicly dismissed the local accounts of the beast. They scoffed at the descriptions of a cow-sized monster with a lion's tail, attributing such tales to peasant ignorance, superstition, and hysteria. It was a wolf, they insisted, just a particularly large and cunning one, and they had killed hundreds of large and cunning wolves. They treated the local population with a mixture of arrogance and contempt, a strategic mistake that would cost them dearly. Their methods were entirely different from Duhamel's. They eschewed the massive, noisy battues as inefficient and amateurish. They were trackers, stalkers. They relied on their hounds to pick up a scent, on their expert knowledge of wolf behavior, and on the quiet, patient arts of poison and traps. For 4 long and frustrating months they hunted. They staked out pastures with poisoned bait, lacing the carcasses of sheep with lethal doses of arsenic and strychnine. They identified what they believed were the beast's primary travel routes, the narrow trails along ridges and through valleys, and set huge iron-jawed traps, carefully camouflaged with leaves and dirt. But the beast seemed to possess an almost supernatural intelligence, or perhaps it was simply guided by a sense of smell that could detect the faintest trace of human meddling. It never touched the poisoned bait. It never sprang their traps. And all the while it continued its killing spree, sometimes striking just a few miles from where the Dianevils were based, as if it were deliberately mocking their efforts. Their hounds, so effective in the rolling fields and open woodlands of Normandy, were no match for the beast in the rugged, rocky terrain of Gévaudan. They would lose the scent on the granite plateaus, or the beast would lead them on punishing chases through deep gorges that left them exhausted and injured. The Dianevils' initial arrogance curdled into raw frustration. Their relationship with the local populace, already poor, soured completely. The peasants, resentful of their dismissive attitude, began to actively mislead them, providing false information about sightings or refusing to cooperate with their hunts. Cornered, facing failure, and desperate for an excuse, the Dianevils began to publicly entertain the very local superstitions they had once scorned. They started to claim that the beast was no ordinary animal, that it was a loup-garou, a werewolf, and that it was being protected by a sorcerer who could render it immune to their traps and poisons. This may have salvaged some of their professional pride by shifting the blame to the supernatural, but it did nothing to help the people of Gévaudan. By June of 1765, King Louis XV had lost all patience. The celebrated wolf hunters had proven to be as ineffective as the soldiers. The Dianevils were curtly ordered back to Normandy, their grand reputations in tatters. The king now understood that this was no ordinary beast, and it required an extraordinary response. He decided to send his own man, a man who represented the king's personal authority and skill, a man whose success or failure would reflect directly upon the crown. He summoned his porte-arquebuse, his royal gun-bearer. His name was François Antoine. The arrival of François Antoine in Gévaudan in late June 1765 signaled a major escalation in the hunt. Antoine was no mere courtier or ceremonial hunter. He was a decorated war hero, a knight of the prestigious Order of St. Louis, and arguably the most famous and respected hunter in all of France. He was in his late 60s, a man of immense experience, gravitas, and quiet, steely determination. He arrived not with the swagger of the Dianevils, but with the deadly seriousness of a man sent by his king to resolve a crisis of state. He was accompanied by his son, Robert François Antoine de Beauterne, who was himself an accomplished marksman, several expert gamekeepers from the royal hunts at Versailles, and a small detachment of soldiers for support. His mission was simple: kill the beast whatever the cost. Antoine's approach was a masterclass in methodical investigation. He spent his first weeks not hunting, but gathering intelligence. He traveled throughout the region, painstakingly interviewing witnesses, cross-referencing their accounts, and creating a detailed map of the attacks, looking for patterns in the beast's territory and behavior. He publicly dismissed the supernatural theories of werewolves and sorcerers as nonsense, but unlike his predecessors, he did not dismiss the eyewitness descriptions themselves. He listened carefully. He concluded that while the peasants may have been prone to exaggeration, the sheer consistency of the reports about the creature's size, coloring, and behavior convinced him that this was a unique and highly dangerous animal. He then set about organizing a series of carefully planned strategic hunts. He combined the large-scale battue to move the creature with the stalking and tracking skills of his expert gamekeepers. He studied the terrain, identified the beast's likely core territory in the dense forests of the Margeride Mountains, and began to systematically apply pressure. The hunt became a tense and grueling cat-and-mouse game, played out across hundreds of square miles of unforgiving landscape throughout the summer of 1765. There were near misses that only added to the beast's legend of invulnerability. On one occasion, the beast was spotted and pursued into a bog, where it became stuck in the thick mud. The hunters closed in for the kill, but with a mighty effort, it managed to pull itself free and escape into the woods. On several other occasions it was shot at, sometimes from relatively close range. One report claims a hunter hit it squarely in the chest, only for the creature to shake itself and run off, apparently unharmed. Its seeming invulnerability was becoming one of its most terrifying and mystifying attributes. The pressure on Antoine was immense. He was sending regular, detailed reports back to the court at Versailles. The king wanted results. Autumn was approaching, and the fear of facing another long winter of terror was palpable among the populace. Then, on September 20, 1765, Antoine's persistence and professionalism finally paid off. He had organized a hunt near the Abbey of Chazes. As the beaters moved through the woods, they fleshed out a massive wolf-like creature. It ran directly towards the position where Antoine himself was waiting, hidden behind a low stone wall. He was a man of iron nerve. He let the creature come on, waiting for the perfect shot. He raised his heavy musket, a specially made royal hunting gun that he had loaded with a custom charge of heavy gunpowder and 5 large-caliber shot. He fired. The impact of the shot threw the creature to the ground. It struggled to rise, and Antoine's son de Beauterne, who was positioned nearby, fired a second shot. Still, the beast was not dead. With its last ounce of strength, it tried to charge Antoine, who was frantically trying to reload. One of his gamekeepers, Richard, ran forward and managed to get in a final, fatal shot from his own musket. The great beast was finally still. They approached cautiously. It was an enormous male wolf, far larger than any of them had ever seen. It weighed, according to Antoine's report, 130 pounds, and measured nearly 6 feet from its nose to the tip of its tail. Its fur was thick and gray, its teeth yellowed and formidable. The body was carried in triumph to a nearby village. A crowd gathered, a mixture of jubilation, relief, and lingering fear. Antoine, in a brilliant move to solidify his victory and legitimize his kill, had many of the survivors of the beast's attacks brought to see the dead animal. According to his official, notarized report, many of them positively identified it as their attacker. A young woman named Marie-Jeanne Vallée, who had famously survived an attack by stabbing the beast with a bayonet fixed to a pole, pointed to a scar on the wolf's shoulder that corresponded exactly to the wound she had inflicted months earlier. An autopsy was performed by a local surgeon. Its stomach was found to be empty, but Antoine confidently declared that its immense size, the identifying marks, and the positive identifications were proof positive that this was the beast of Gévaudan. The news was rushed by special courier to the king at Versailles. The kingdom celebrated. The beast of Gévaudan was dead. François Antoine was a national hero. He was showered with rewards by a grateful king, a huge pension, titles, and the right to add the image of the slain wolf to his coat of arms. The massive wolf was carefully measured, its skin preserved, and then it was stuffed and mounted by the royal taxidermist. It was put on display at the court, a powerful symbol of the triumph of the king's order over the chaos of the wild. The official story had been written and sealed. François Antoine and his men packed up their equipment and left Gévaudan in a blaze of glory. But the official story was wrong. The nightmare was not over. Part 4. The Second Beast and the Silver Bullet. For 2 months, from late September to the end of November 1765, an uneasy peace, fragile as a pane of ice on a winter pond, settled over the hills and valleys of Gévaudan. There were no attacks. No one went missing from the pastures. The people began to breathe again. to dare to believe that the terror was truly over. They began to venture back into the fields and forests, cautiously at first, their eyes still scanning the treeline, then with growing confidence. The story of François Antoine and his great wolf of chasses became the accepted truth, a new piece of local history. And then on December 2nd the ice broke. The terror returned with a vengeance. Near the village of La Bessure-Sainte-Marie, 2 children were attacked in a field. One, a young girl, was badly mauled but managed to escape. The other, a boy, was killed and partially eaten. The news spread through the region like a deathly chill. A wave of cold dread that extinguished the newfound hope in an instant. The beast was back. The psychological impact of this resurgence is difficult to overstate. It was a blow more devastating than any of the previous attacks. Before, there had at least been the hope that the monster, whatever it was, could be killed. Now that hope was extinguished. The people of Gévaudan were plunged into a state of profound, existential despair. What was this thing? Was it a ghost, a demon that could not be killed by mortal weapons? Had Antoine killed its mate, enraging it further? Or, most frighteningly, had the king's men simply killed the wrong animal, a random large wolf, and allowed the true monster to escape, while the court celebrated a hollow victory? The reaction from the authorities in Paris was one of swift and resolute denial. The king, having already declared a triumphant end to the affair and lavishly celebrated his hero, could not possibly admit a mistake. To do so would be to reopen the wound of national humiliation, and call the competence of his own chosen hunter into question. The official position of the court, therefore, was that the great beast of Gévaudan was, and remained, dead. These new attacks, they insisted, were the work of ordinary wolves, and the local peasants, traumatized and prone to hysteria, were simply exaggerating the threat, attributing any and all wolf attacks to their famous monster. The people of Gévaudan were now utterly, cruelly alone. There would be no more royal hunters. There would be no more companies of dragoons. The nation and its king had moved on. They were left to face their demon by themselves. The attacks continued with grim regularity throughout 1766, and into the spring of 1767. The second beast, as it came to be known, was just as savage and audacious as the first. It seemed to have learned nothing from the great hunt. It attacked in broad daylight, sometimes in full view of a nearby village, as if to proclaim its impunity. The death toll mounted once more, adding another 24 names to the bloody tally. The hunt was now entirely in the hands of the local gentry, and the peasantry themselves. A local nobleman, the young and determined Marquis d'Apcher, whose own lands had been ravaged by the beast, tried to keep up the fight. He offered rewards from his own pocket and organized local hunts, but these were smaller, less organized affairs, fueled by desperation rather than hope. It seemed the beast was a permanent feature of their lives, a curse that would never be lifted. The final chapter of this bloody saga, the moment of deliverance, belongs not to a soldier, a professional hunter, or a royal courtier, but to a local man, a figure as enigmatic and steeped in folklore as the beast itself. His name was Jean Chastel. Jean Chastel was an unlikely hero. He was a farmer and an innkeeper from the village of La Bessure-Sainte-Marie, the very area where the second wave of attacks had begun. He was in his 60s, a man who had spent his entire life in the rugged hills of Gévaudan. He was known throughout the region as a skilled and patient hunter, but he was also a man of strange and intense reputation. He was known to be almost fanatically religious, a man who carried his Bible with him everywhere, and seemed to exist in a state of constant, fervent dialogue with his God. He was also the patriarch of a family that was viewed with a degree of suspicion and fear by their neighbors. His sons, particularly Pierre and Antoine Chastel, were known to be strange and reclusive men. They were masters of the forest, spending long periods of time living wild, seemingly unafraid of the beasts that had sent everyone else cowering in their homes. This lack of fear was seen as unnatural, even sinister. Rumor circulated that the Chastels had some kind of dark pact with the forest, or perhaps even with the beast itself. The family had even been briefly imprisoned by François Antoine during his great hunt, on suspicion of obstructing his efforts or perhaps knowing more than they let on. As the attacks of the second beast reached their peak in the spring of 1767, the Marquis d'Apcher, in a last desperate effort, decided to organize one final large-scale hunt. He gathered a small army of about 300 volunteers, including all the best local hunters he could muster. Among them was the quiet, pious, and inscrutable Jean Chastel. The legend that has grown around this final hunt is powerful, and while it is now impossible to separate historical fact from 2 centuries of folkloric embellishment, it paints a vivid and potent picture. The story goes that on the morning of the hunt, June 19, 1767, Jean Chastel did not prepare like the other hunters. He did not simply clean his musket and check his powder. He attended Mass. He had his musket formally blessed by the parish priest, and then, according to the most famous part of the legend, he sat by his fire and performed a ritual. He took a silver religious medallion of the Virgin Mary, melted it down in a ladle, and from the molten silver, he carefully cast 3 bullets. He believed he was not hunting a mere animal. He was going out to face a demon, a loup-garou, a creature beyond the laws of nature, and he knew from the ancient lore that such an entity could only be laid low by a blessed silver projectile. The small army of hunters made its way to the wooded slopes of Mont Mouchet, in an area called the Saône d'Avers, a place where the beast had been recently sighted. The hunt began. The men spread out, moving through the trees, their voices and the barking of their dogs echoing through the woods. But Jean Chastel, according to the legend, did not join the main party. He found a rocky outcrop at a pass where he believed the beast might try to break cover. He sat down, took his worn Bible from his coat, and began to read his prayers, his blessed musket resting across his knees. He was calm. He was waiting. After some time, he heard a disturbance in the undergrowth. A huge, wolf-like creature emerged from the forest and stood before him. It was the beast. But it did not charge. It did not snarl. According to the story, it simply stood there, watching him as if it recognized him, as if it had an appointment to keep on that lonely hillside. Chastel, with unnerving calm, finished the passage of scripture he was reading. He closed his Bible, carefully placed it back in his coat, and slowly, deliberately, picked up his musket. He took aim and fired. The first shot struck the creature in the shoulder. It barely flinched. He reloaded with the practiced speed of a lifetime of hunting. He fired again. The second bullet, one of the silver ones, the legend insists struck true. The great beast of Gévaudan shuddered, let out a final gasping cry, and collapsed to the ground dead. Jean Chastel stood over the body of his kill. The reign of terror was finally truly over. From that day forward there were no more attacks. The killings stopped. The body of the creature Chastel had killed was paraded in triumph through the villages of Gévaudan. It was then brought to the Marquis d'Apcher's castle, where it was examined by 2 local surgeons, Dr. Jean-Antoine Boulanger and Dr. Jean-Joseph Marin. Their official autopsy report, which survives to this day, is one of the most fascinating and puzzling documents in this entire affair. This was clearly not the same animal that François Antoine had killed 2 years earlier. It was smaller, weighing around 100 pounds. But its appearance was far, far stranger than a normal wolf. Their report describes an animal with an unusually large head, out of all proportion to its body. It had a very long pig-like snout. Its ears were small and pointed. Its fur was a dingy grayish-brown, with strange reddish patches, and was said to be remarkably thin in places. Most remarkably, they noted that it had membranes that could cover its eyes, a nictitating membrane, a third eyelid found in birds, reptiles, and some mammals like cats, but not in wolves. Its teeth were more numerous and differently arranged than a wolf's. And most tellingly, when they opened its stomach, they found the remains of its last meal, the collarbone of a young girl who had been killed the previous day. This was, without a shadow of a doubt, the killer. Jean Chastel was hailed as the savior of Gévaudan. He was given a modest reward by the Marquis. Filled with pride, he and his sons decided to take the body of the beast all the way to the court at Versailles, expecting the same hero's welcome and lavish rewards that François-Antoine had received. But the king was not interested. The court had already celebrated the end of the beast 2 years earlier. Chastel's strange, decomposing creature was an embarrassment, a living or rather, dead contradiction to the official state-sanctioned narrative. The carcass, which had begun to rot badly on the long summer journey, was unceremoniously buried in the palace gardens without ever being properly examined by the royal naturalists. Jean Chastel was dismissed with a paltry sum and sent home, a hero to his own people, but a footnote to the official record of the state. But in Gévaudan he was a legend. He was the man who had succeeded where the army and the king's own hunters had failed. He was the man who had faced the monster and, with faith and a silver bullet, had ended the 3-year nightmare. Part 5. The investigation unmasking the monster. The killings stopped. The beast was dead. The long shadow of fear slowly receded from Gévaudan. But the death of the creature was not the end of the story. It was the birth of the mystery. For over 2.5 centuries, historians, scientists, zoologists, and enthusiasts of cryptozoology have been locked in a debate over the identity of the beast of Gévaudan. The evidence is a frustrating tangle of credible historical documents, sensationalized press reports, and unreliable eyewitness accounts filtered through terror and superstition. The physical proof: the bodies of the 2 creatures is long gone, lost to time and royal indifference. We are left in the position of cold case detectives, sifting through the ancient evidence, trying to construct a profile of the killer. Let us examine the prime suspects in this enduring historical mystery. Theory 1: the wolf pack hypothesis. This is the simplest, most rational, and official explanation. It posits that the beast, or rather beasts, were nothing more than a small number of unusually large and aggressive Eurasian wolves. The 18th century was the height of the Little Ice Age, and the winters of the 1760s were particularly severe. This theory suggests that a combination of factors: a harsh winter driving away natural prey like deer and boar, the encroachment of human settlement on wolf territory, and perhaps a rabid or unusually bold alpha male leading a pack could have caused them to start preying on the most vulnerable and accessible food source: humans, specifically the small, isolated figures of children and women shepherds. The strengths of this theory are its simplicity and its adherence to Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. Wolves do, on very rare occasions, attack humans. The existence of 2 beasts, the large wolf killed by François-Antoine and the second creature killed by Jean Chastel, is easily and logically explained by the existence of a pack. Antoine killed the alpha male, causing a temporary halt in the attacks. Then, another dominant member of the pack, perhaps its mate or a new alpha, took over, becoming the second beast. The wildly different and often fantastical descriptions from eyewitnesses can be attributed to the panic and terror of the moment, filtered through the lens of local superstition. A large wolf, seen for a split second by a terrified child in the failing light, could easily be exaggerated into a monster the size of a cow with the lion's tail. The story of the beast, in this view, is a classic example of how a real-world predator problem can escalate into a full-blown moral panic and monster myth. The weaknesses of this theory, however, are significant and difficult to dismiss. The beast's behavior was highly atypical for a wolf. Wolves are typically ambush predators that are shy of humans. They will generally not consistently and systematically hunt humans unless truly, desperately starving. The beast, however, seemed to prefer human prey, often ignoring nearby livestock which would have been an easier and more substantial meal. The method of attack, consistently targeting the head and neck with enough force to decapitate, is also unusual for a wolf. Furthermore, the sheer inability of expert hunters to kill it is puzzling. Captain Duhamel, the Dianevils, and François Antoine were not amateurs. They were men who knew wolves, their habits, and their weaknesses better than anyone in France. Yet they were all baffled by the creature's cunning, its seeming invulnerability, and its ability to consistently evade their best-laid traps and most organized hunts. Would an ordinary wolf, even a large and intelligent one, be able to outsmart thousands of hunters for 3 years and survive being shot on multiple occasions? For many researchers, the wolf theory, while rational, simply does not fit all the facts of the case. Theory 2. The exotic animal hypothesis. This theory proposes that the beast was not a native European animal at all, but an exotic creature that had been brought to France and had either escaped from a private menagerie or been deliberately released. This opens up a fascinating field of zoological speculation. The primary suspect in this category has long been the striped hyena. Hyena. The hyena theory is intriguing because it aligns remarkably well with some of the more unusual physical descriptions of the beast. The strange reddish-gray fur with the prominent dark stripe down the back is a classic feature of the striped hyena. The powerful neck and jaws, capable of crushing bone, could certainly account for the decapitations. The sloping back, the long snout, and the strange laughing or screaming cry are all consistent with a hyena. An escaped hyena, unfamiliar with the local fauna and not naturally fearing humans, might well view lone shepherds as easy prey. Where would a hyena come from in 18th century France? It's entirely possible that a local nobleman kept one in a private menagerie. These collections of exotic animals were fashionable status symbols among the wealthy at the time. An animal could have escaped, or a menagerie could have been disbanded after its owner's death, with the animals simply being turned loose. The main problem with this theory is survival. Could a single animal, native to the warmer climates of Africa, the Middle East and India, survive several brutal snowbound winters in the mountains of Gévaudan? Seems highly unlikely. Another popular candidate, especially in more recent years, is a wolf-dog hybrid. This theory suggests the beast was the product of a cross between a wolf and a large, powerful domestic dog, such as a mastiff. Such a hybrid could exhibit a combination of traits that would make it a perfect monster. It could possess the size and strength of a large mastiff, combined with the cunning and stamina of a wolf. Crucially, a hybrid often loses the natural, ingrained fear of humans that is characteristic of wild wolves. This could explain the beast's incredible boldness and its specific targeting of human prey. The unusual physical features could be the result of this crossbreeding. This theory is compelling because it provides a biological explanation for the beast's abnormal behavior, without resorting to exotic animals that would be ill-suited to the climate. Other candidates have been proposed over the years: a lion or lioness, to explain the tufted tail, a wolverine, or even a surviving prehistoric predator, but these are generally considered to be in the realm of fringe speculation. The hybrid theory and, to a lesser extent, the hyena theory, remain the most plausible exotic explanations. Theory 3. The human hand hypothesis. This is perhaps the most compelling, the most complex, and the most sinister theory of all. It is the theory that transforms this story from a monster hunt into a dark and twisted true crime mystery. This theory posits that the beast was not just an animal, but an instrument, a weapon wielded by a human intelligence. It suggests that a serial killer or a group of sadistic killers was at work using a large trained animal to commit, or at least assist in, their horrific crimes. This theory neatly and chillingly explains many of the beast's most puzzling attributes. Its uncanny intelligence and ability to evade the hunts. It was being directed by a human master who knew the terrain, understood the hunter's plans, and could hide it when necessary. Its specific preference for human victims. It was trained to attack them. Its seeming invulnerability. Perhaps its human master had fitted it with a protective cuirass, a tough hide of a boar or other animal, worn under its own fur, which could deflect musket balls and blades. The killer might have even been present at many of the attacks, hiding nearby, delivering the fatal wounds himself with the knife or blade, while the animal created a terrifying distraction. This would explain the surgical precision of some of the wounds and the seemingly malicious, non-predatory nature of the killings. Who would do such a thing? The finger of suspicion, both at the time and among modern researchers, has long pointed towards one family, the Chastels. Let us re-examine the evidence. The Chastel family, particularly the sons Pierre and Antoine, were known recluses, masters of the forest, who showed no fear of the beast. Antoine Chastel was rumored to keep a menagerie of strange animals. Could he, a disturbed and isolated individual, have been a sadist who captured and trained a Creaturia large wolf-dog hybrid, perhaps to attack and kill for him? Could he have been the mastermind behind the 3-year reign of terror? This theory presents a dark and tragic narrative. Jean Chastel, the father, eventually discovers the monstrous truth about his own son's activities. The final hunt is not just a hunt. It is a grim personal necessity. He goes out to kill the creature his own family has unleashed upon the world. He makes his silver bullets not just out of piety, but as a symbolic act of purification. The beast allows him to approach, the legend says, because it knows him. His shot is not just the act of a hunter. It is the act of a father cleaning up his family's horrific, unforgivable secret. This would explain why the attack stopped so suddenly and so permanently after he killed the second creature. He hadn't just killed an animal. He had broken the conspiracy and ended the entire murderous enterprise. It would also explain why he was treated so poorly at Versailles. Perhaps rumors of his family's potential involvement had reached the court, and the king wanted nothing to do with the messy, terrifying truth. This theory, while lacking direct, prosecutable proof, provides a disturbingly complete psychological and narrative explanation for the events. It accounts for the beast's intelligence, its abnormal behavior, the specific nature of the violence, and the abrupt and final end to the killings. The beast of Gévaudan may not have been a supernatural monster, but something far more real and far more terrifying. A monster created, trained, and guided by the hand of man. Part 6. The Legacy of the Beast. The story of the beast of Gévaudan did not end with the burial of the creature's rotting carcass in the gardens of Versailles in 1767. In fact, that was just the beginning of its long and fascinating afterlife, as one of Europe's most potent and enduring legends. In the immediate aftermath, the terror slowly faded from the region, but it was replaced by a deep and lasting collective trauma, a dark memory that would be woven into the very fabric of the area's identity. For generations, the story of La Bête was told around fireplaces on long winter nights. A cautionary tale to keep children out of the woods at dusk, a reminder of the time when a monster walked among them. The beast became their own personal dragon, a foundational myth for the region. But the story's influence spread far beyond the mountainous borders of Gévaudan. It became a foundational text in the modern mythology of the werewolf. While the legend of the loup-garou is ancient, stretching back to classical antiquity, the story of Gévaudan provided it with something new and powerful, a historical anchor. It was a terrifyingly true story that seemed to validate the darkest fears of the folk tradition. The saga contained all the classic elements that would come to define the modern werewolf narrative. A ravenous, wolf-like creature of immense size and power terrorizing a rural community, its seeming invulnerability to normal weapons, and its final legendary defeat by a silver bullet. It is no exaggeration to say that almost every modern werewolf story, from classic Hollywood horror films to contemporary novels, owes a small but significant debt to Jean Chastel and his monstrous quarry. The beast of Gévaudan took the werewolf out of the realm of pure folklore and placed it, however ambiguously, into the pages of history. The beast also holds a unique and revered place in the strange and fascinating world of cryptozoology, the study of and search for unknown, legendary, or extinct animals whose existence is unproven. It is, perhaps, the most well-documented and historically verifiable case of a cryptid in history. Unlike modern legends like Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, which rely on blurry photographs and anecdotal sightings, the case of the Beast of Gévaudan is supported by a mountain of primary source material. We have a specific time frame, a specific location, and a grimly precise list of over 100 named victims. We have official government documents, detailed military reports, surviving autopsy records, and extensive press coverage from the period. The Beast of Gévaudan is not just a myth. It is a historical event that demands a biological explanation, even if that explanation remains tantalizingly out of reach. It represents the ultimate cold case for students of historical monsters, a puzzle of a creature that undeniably existed, killed, and then vanished from the earth, leaving only a bloody legend in its wake. The legacy of the beast is, therefore, a triple legacy. For the people of Gévaudan and for French history, it is a dark and traumatic chapter, a chilling reminder of a time when their small corner of the world was dragged back into a pre-modern nightmare, even as Paris celebrated the dawn of reason. For folklorists and fans of horror, it is a cornerstone of the werewolf myth, a story that codified many of the tropes we now take for granted as part of the genre. And for historians, scientists, and mystery lovers, it remains the ultimate enigma, a creature that sits uncomfortably on the razor's edge between zoology and demonology, between historical event and supernatural horror. The mystery endures because each theory, while compelling, leaves frustrating questions unanswered. If it was just a wolf, why was it so uniquely savage and intelligent? If it was an exotic animal, how did it survive the harsh climate and remain uncaught for so long? And if it was a human conspiracy, who precisely were the killers and how did they manage to maintain their horrific secret so perfectly? The beauty and the terror of the Beast of Gévaudan lie in that very uncertainty. It allows the monster to remain whatever we fear it to be: a freak of nature, a demon from hell, or the reflection of the darkness that can lurk within the human heart itself. Thank you for joining me on this long and dark hunt for the Beast of Gévaudan. We have journeyed back to a time and place where the rational world of the Enlightenment collided with the primal medieval terror. We have seen how a single monstrous entity could hold a nation captive, challenge the authority of a king, and forge a legend that has echoed down the centuries. If this deep dive into one of history's greatest and most terrifying unsolved mysteries has captured your imagination, I would be very grateful if you would show your support for this channel. Please consider leaving a like, subscribing to Bedtime History for more journeys into the fascinating and often unsettling corners of the past, and ringing the notification bell so that you don't miss our next story. And now, as we leave the haunted forests of Gévaudan behind, I leave you with the final, unavoidable question. After hearing the extensive evidence, the eyewitness accounts, the official reports, and the competing theories, what do you believe? What was the Beast of Gévaudan? Do you subscribe to the rational scientific explanation of a wolf or a hybrid? Or does the evidence for an escaped exotic animal seem more compelling? Or do you, like many who have studied this case, believe that the true monster in this story was chillingly, terrifyingly human? Please share your own detailed theories and conclusions in the comments section below. The investigation, after all, is still open, and I look forward to reading your contributions to this enduring and profound mystery. Until next time, sleep well and be thankful that the monsters of our age are, for the most part, a little less literal.